So this is the first of the series of our coffee hours sponsored by the Diversity and Minority Affairs Committee. And so this first session is going to be facilitated by Dr. Deborah Willis. And this is going to be a facilitator sort of training session. So Dr. Willis is here joining us from the University of Michigan, and she's the Assistant Director and Senior Program Lead for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Certificate Program there. And some of you might remember, Dr. Willis joined us all for the Diversity and Minority Affairs Committee, a roundtable discussion at our 2021 virtual midwinter meeting. And so today, Dr. Willis is going to be focusing on learning how to facilitate small group discussions related to DEI and issues. And this session is not just for those of us who want to participate in some sort of formal discussion, but it's also for those of us who find ourselves in unexpected situations in the lab or at a conference or amongst friends when some of these diversity, equity, and inclusion questions arise. So, we really want to learn, how do we provide sort of an open opportunity for dialogue in those situations? And so I'm just going to turn it over to Dr. Willis.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Just confirming that, let me go to present mode, that you can see the screen.
Yes.
And great. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate you all coming, and I apologize once again that my internet went out right before I came. I do want to just ask really quick, what concerns do you have about facilitating a DEI discussion? And I'd love for you to just, I'm going to put this in the chat, and we will not wait for everybody to respond, but I would love to see this. I'm going to go to chat here. Okay, so if you could just respond to that, and how you do it is by going right here to the green plus sign. If you click that, and then you'll be able to just type your concern or question in there really quickly. And then we'll all be able to see that going forward, and we'll try to come back to that and make sure that we get your questions and answers, concerns addressed. So we'll come back to that soon. So today, I want to, I talked to you about objectives for facilitation, to discuss how to prepare for facilitation, discuss facilitator characteristics, how to manage expectations, importance of community guidelines, extremely important for these type of DEI kind of discussions and conversations, tips and strategies for facilitation, how to manage hot moments, and to provide some resources for you. So in doing that, I just want to manage expectations and say that, facilitation is a skill, right? It's a skill that we need. And the more you do it, the better. And there are workshops that take full day workshops on facilitation alone. And it's really complicated by issues that are emotionally charged. So I want to manage expectations today and say, we're not going to get into a deep dive about it. But I do believe that all of us can prepare, all of us are equipped and can prepare for these conversations, at least at like an entry level, which I think is very important, because if we avoid the conversations, then we don't reach the goals that we need. So some of the invitations I have for you today, and then invitations that I suggest you say to the people that you're having the discussions with, is to kind of be fully present and engaged, which is difficult to do, right? We're doing a lot of things, and I'm guilty of working on 500 different things while I'm doing something. But when you're facilitating conversations about race, it's going to be really important that you're fully present and engaged for the people. You want to create a welcoming environment, and that is If it's a virtual environment, it's lots of different things you can do when people come on. You can ask them to write a question. You can do icebreakers in the chat. You can have your pronouns listed if that's important to your community. But think about how you can provide a welcome environment. If you're in person, when people are coming in, it's important for you to smile. It's important for you to acknowledge who they are and tell them that you're happy for them to be there, et cetera, et cetera. Recognize and explicitly state that none of us have arrived here and none of us are experts in this space. And so I think that's really important for managing expectations. You're saying, listen, I'm here as facilitating this conversation because I feel like it's an important conversation. I don't have all of the answers. We might run up into some bumpy things because these are emotionally charged topics. And when we do, we'll do this. So I'm learning here with you. I think that's important. Tell them that it's very important to share the responsibility for the discussion because it's an active learning space. All of us are trying to learn and get to our expectations. Encourage that they interact in a chat. Explain that their colleagues can learn from them. We have so much that we can offer. If you're virtually, of course, the chat is how you do that. I think using tools like this idea boards and tools like Poll Everywhere allows people to contribute anonymously, if that's important. So think about how you can use those tools and allow people to contribute anonymously. And then consider how your comments will impact others. And so that's very important because, once again, emotionally charged topics. And the main thing is accept a lack of closure, right? The work is after the workshop. And that's very important because you're not going to solve what you need to solve. And it's important to keep the discussions going. So you'll say, we're opening these discussions and we want to keep going. And think about specific actions you can take afterwards. So I think one thing that's really important that is not talked about enough is how you prepare yourself as a facilitator before you go into these spaces. And that is like really reflect on who you are, your primary identities. How do they reflect on the topic that you're talking about? And this topic can be any number of DEI topics, right? So we have topics about race, gender, religion, politics, LGBTQ, so many different things. Think about how those topics affect you. What are your triggers? And I think a lot of the times we don't think about our triggers. And if we are the person to do this particular thing in this particular moment. So if something major just happened and it's still raw to you, you're not healed from it, you're very angry, then maybe you don't do that facilitation of that topic. Or we'll talk about co-facilitating, that'll be important. Are you angry? Are you hurting? Think about that. What topics can you handle? Are your emotions in check? Because you're going to be a container for all of these emotions. So your emotions have to be really in check. And can you be authentic and vulnerable? So this is a lot of times where people are like, I want to do these, I want to facilitate these topics, but are you willing to tell a story about yourself around the topics? Are you willing to reveal? Because the more you can do that, the more trust you will get out of the people that you're working with. And it's important to establish that trust. That's why I think more than one conversation is important. And so these are some of the social identities that I think we have to acknowledge from other people and from ourselves, right? And how those social identities are influencing our lens of what we see. And all of this is coming into this space of these emotionally charged topics. So you just doing that self-reflection, that self-work, just really evaluating where you are and being mindful and at peace before you go is super important. And then the context, like from the broader context to specific, what's going on in the world? What's the current world news? What's happening? How will that affect your audience? So when you're thinking about these personalities and these identities that are coming, if something just happened that's major that'll affect your community, then think about that. What are the known identities of those in a workshop? power dynamics that are in play. So you need to know who's there, who's contributing, and think about all of that as you're coming in and the voices that are missing. And I really suggest co-facilitation. And if you pair with a partner that has different identities than you, then that's important because you can relate more to other people that are in the room and they can see those identities play out, right? So if you can do that, you can complement each other. You can share your triggers with your co-facilitator. Preparation is so important so that you know when they can step in. Get to know each other well, and co-facilitating requires planning jointly. So do that, have practice sessions. I think all of this is important for these conversations. And then your audience, like I was saying, if you can provide as much pre-work as possible and as much structure, so you tell them exactly what is going to happen. It's hard enough to go into these conversations anyway. So if you say something like very general, we're going to have a conversation around race, then people are already kind of tense. So you want to say exactly what you're going to have. If you have pre-work, if it's about a topic, if it's about a specific, if you can give us a specific question that you're going to all think about. Later, I'll talk about some of the other things, other tools you can use, but I think it's very important to do that in terms of managing expectations and preparing the community guidelines. Community guidelines are so super important for this. I'm going to share a folder with you with resources. And then these are two very good examples of what community guidelines might look like. So I'll give you the folder. It has these already in there. I'll put it in the chat in just a second. But you'll be developing these guidelines as you go. And I think it's important in these spaces, especially. It takes some time, and I think you should take the time. One of them is from IGR, and one of them is a circle of trust touch points. I think it's so important to think about these people have been doing this work for a while on these topics. So when you're talking about which topics or which community guidelines to bring forward, being present and engaged is so important. You want to share airtime and you keep telling them how important that is. Intent and impact. You really want to talk about these things up front. So you want to give examples. Like for example, you may have a good intention when you said that, but you have to own the impact that it hurts someone. And if it hurts someone, then what do we do? And you think about that and talk about that as a community together. You don't want to suppress voices, which happens quite often. And then here's some of the other ones. I won't read them all, but I do think even if you want to give these community guidelines to the group beforehand and say, here are the community guidelines we're considering, but then always, always, always open it up to them to say, if you have any other guidelines that you would suggest, what would they be? Is there something that we're missing here? So that people can feel like they have some ownership as well of the guidelines that are created. So do that. I think that's super important. And we'll talk about community guidelines, and I'll provide lots of different examples for you to get you started. And then make sure you invite them to also be able to contribute. So some of the characteristics of a good facilitator. So this is so important to think about listening. What listening means, you should not be talking the majority of the time. So you're going to present the question or the topic and then allow everyone else to contribute. So listen throughout, acknowledge people for what they said, and then be patient throughout, understanding, accepting, inclusive, meaning you want to think of ways that you can bring other people in. You want to enable people, encourage them, affirming everyone's knowledge. sensitive to the needs of others. And you're going to be willing to learn from mistakes. So, and you will make mistakes. So you may say something, you may misgender someone in a pronoun. You may say something that's offensive. They may say, well, you're asking, this person more or giving this person more lead time. And then we'll talk about ways for you to respond and say, hey, listen, I'm here learning as well. You're dynamic and humble and confident. Right. So some of the skills that I was talking about in terms of what you need, just creating an inclusive environment and how to do that, communicating clear guidelines and instructions. That's what you're there for. You want to manage the group dynamics when things are happening. Empathize with people as they are talking and really acknowledging them. Really actively listening, using verbal facilitation skills, which we'll talk a little bit about. Manage conflict is what you want to do. And then just kind of anticipate that conflict may happen and don't be afraid of it happening. So we'll talk about some of the things you can do when it occurs. And then managing time. In terms of conflict, you'll also establish that with the group in your community guidelines. If there's conflict, what do we want to decide as a group that we're going to do to manage the conflict and allow people to come in to help with that? The role of the facilitator really is to create this container for learning and growing. And the learning often takes place when we are in the edge of our comfort zone. So there'll be conflict of ideas, perspectives, understanding. All of that is inevitable, right? Because we're here because we aren't all thinking on the same page. And you want to turn conflict and discomfort into learning and growth. Create a brave space. So in talking about conflict, this one is, this was created by a surgeon, and I'll have that in the resources. And they have this theory of becoming an anti-racist, but it doesn't have to only be around racism, right? It can be around LGBT, whatever ist or ism that you want to put will all be effective. But you want to think about how you are in this from becoming, when you're going, how you want to get out of this fear. Like, I don't want to talk about anything. I want to deny it. I avoid all the hard questions and I want to stay comfortable. That's in a fear zone. To move to this learning zone where you kind of recognize whatever the DEI concern is present, and it's a current problem, and it's present in the society, it's present in our community. You want to understand your own privilege in that, and we all have privileges one way or the other. So honestly, acknowledging your own privilege. Educate yourself on whatever the topic is. If it's racism, if it's LGBTQ issues, how can you educate yourself? Because that's the first stage, right? After like acknowledging and thinking about your own privileges. Then you want to move them into the growth zone. And the growth zone is where we all understand and acknowledge there will be discomfort and we can sit in it, right? So in these spaces of facilitation, silence is very useful and helpful. And we don't like silence, right? So we try to break the silence by saying something. I'm going to encourage you to allow silence to just be there. You're going to present the question. They're going to think about it, maybe allow people to process. So, and silence in Zoom and online is just even worse than silence in present, but just trying to understand it, that's going to be there. Don't let your mistakes get to you and stop you from doing what you need to do. So they're not gonna deter you. You're gonna keep going and yield to positions of power. So that's what we're trying to get from this fear to learning and continuing to learn to growing. And then you just keep the thing going, right? So you never just get there and you're all done. So we're going to talk about a few tools of facilitation, and one of them is the circle process. The circle process, let me put this in the chat now. I will do that because the circle process, I think, is very, very useful. And So when you get it, someone please confirm that you were allowed to open it and access it. I would appreciate that.
It says I have to request access.
Oh boy. So let me go back. And make sure. Now, you should have access. Do you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, so there's a form in there that says the circle process. And what it is that, you know, you have these circles and everyone gets to speak an equal amount of time, which I think is really important. So you bring up whatever the topic is, and it's 2 documents in there. It's like how to hold a circle process and also the handbook. The handbook is really helpful, and it tells you why, all the rules behind it, all the tools behind it. And we have workshops on the circle process alone. But, you know, it really is helpful with community building and problem solving, resolving conflicts, because it allows everyone to think. So the process, the key elements is a circle and a talking piece. And of course, virtually the talking piece, you'll show whatever, and then you'll say, I'm going to pass this around and I'll pass it to Lisa, or I'll pass it to Arthur. And while you're doing that, you talk about how that's so that everybody has equal amount of time to speak and inclusive. The thing is, if you don't want to speak on whatever the topic is, you don't have to. So, but you will get the piece passed to you virtually. And if you're in a circle, of course, it's much better. And then you'll be able to talk about the topic. So this allows everyone to be able to have some say on the conversation if they want to. And so this is an important inclusive way to have these kind of conversations that are emotionally kind of charged. Has anyone ever done a circle process? Lisa, what did you think about it?
Until just now, I didn't realize that what we were doing was called a circle process. But it was exactly what you're saying. It was very even in terms of everyone's participation was guaranteed. And when you held for us, it was a stick. When you were holding the talking stick, nobody else talked, and everybody had the same amount of stick time. It was very useful.
Mm-hmm. And so you can understand how, like, a topic that is emotional, or how that could be helpful for these times, and how also it will be helpful for the people who are like introverts, because, you know, in some of these conversations you have different personalities, and I'll put another resource in here around these topics. Some of them, you have the dominator who just wants to control the whole conversation, right? So this is a way to stop that dominator. You have the rambler who wants to go on and on for days and days, and how do you get that rambler back on key? So, and you have the person that's like so quiet and never says anything, and you wonder if they're there, if they're processing, if they don't want to be there. So you can deal with these kind of I wouldn't say difficult, but different personalities that in an easier kind of way that's already laid out. So I think that's helpful. Another thing is reflection exercises, videos, and role playing. So we'll talk a little bit about each of those coming up. I do want to share some of the tools that you can use. And this one, I like this reciprocal empathy. And so we're going to take a few minutes to look at this short video. But LinkedIn Learning is an incredibly great tool that most of us have access to via our universities, right? And so you can take these short 2 or 3 minute clips and play the clip and then see where to go from there. So this is what I'm going to do for this short clip. Let me know if you can hear it.
A difference when engaging in conversations about polarizing topics. Sure, we should aspire to find common ground and identify similarities, things we can agree on, but we can't stay there if we expect to get to reciprocal empathy, the ability to see situations from each other's perspectives to alleviate polarization and enhance our working relationships. Delving into differences means we are exploring and naming our differences. Let's look at the steps to apply as we have these conversations. First, you have to establish the ground rules, including your expectations around confidentiality. Next, acknowledge that there's polarization and your differences in perspectives. Thirdly, establish some kind of shared meaning. Next, you'll want to distinguish interpretations and clarify definitions. You'll also want to suspend judgment. Strive for reciprocal empathy in that each can respect the other's view. You'll want to consider impact and not just intent. And really important, you want to know when to pause the conversation for more learning and reflection. Let's see how these skills might play out in a real conversation. Miriam and John are coworkers. Recently, Miriam overheard John's assumption about Muslims being responsible for a violent attack. Miriam and John have begun to do the work around building trust and finding common ground, and are at a point where they can now begin to explore their differences. Listen to the dialogue and see if you observe areas where they are practicing these skills.
How was your day, John?
Great, thanks.
I am glad we are talking more and are able to speak candidly and confidentially.
Yeah, I am too. There's a lot more I can learn from you.
Yes, I think something we can both agree on is that we all care about our families and we all want to be safe.
Yeah, safety is really important to me. And that's why I think that there needs to be strict rules around immigration.
Yes, I agree with rules, but the rules should be fair.
You know, I mean, people who are peaceful and follow the law are treated fairly.
Really? It's not just a few people that have been negatively affected by Islamophobia. And research shows that globally, many Muslims feel that they are not respected by those in the West, and even non-Muslims believe that we're not respected.
I'm sorry. I didn't know that, Miriam. Maybe we need to take a pause. We could do some more reflecting and then meet up again later to have the conversation.
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
John and Miriam may not ever agree.
So you can see how using a tool like this would be helpful in your group conversations. What do you think about the video, and how do you think it can promote conversation in one of your groups? What stood out for you? What can you see about this that's happening in your group? What can you see coming out? Or what reactions do you have? How could you use something like this? So you think it will be helpful in difficult conversations, especially virtually? Anyone could speak because we have a small enough group, and I don't think you're all going to be rushing to speak at one time. You could just unmute yourself.
I like the take a pause because it was really emotional right then. It gave everyone a chance maybe for the gentleman to go and review the literature. And I think that's very effective. I hadn't thought of that before.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, and when you're facilitating these conversations, if you see, so this was a one-on-one conversation, but if you're doing a small group and something like this happens, right? What you can say is, wait, think about how you and your co-facilitator are going to decide when you should pause. And you can take, when you pause, you can say, wait, this sounds like, you can ask the group, this sounds like it's a topic that we might want to take offline, and maybe revisit this when we come back. The group can then say what they want to happen. Now, the group may say, no, I think this is important. We should talk about it. And so then you think, oh, well, how can we go about this conversation such that it's in a productive way, right? Or you as a facilitator could say, I agree. I'm going to acknowledge his suggestion to take a pause and then leave it there. Leave it on a table, a parking lot that you can have when you're doing these kind of facilitating conversations. You can have a parking lot. Afterwards, you can send this to the group to say, here's what happened. What you don't want to do is never go back to it or acknowledge that there was a conflict. So you'll say, oh, this is what happened. Here's some of the things we looked up. We're going to follow up with that, and then send them resources, and then maybe to come back. If you can have those two people actually come back together to a group, maybe after talking online, and so that the group can see the healing process that happened, I think that's really important as well. But using these type of tools where you could say, here's something that happened. So it's two good purposes of these kind of LinkedIn learning or short videos. You don't want them to be over 5 minutes because then people lose their attention. But to bring up topics that may not come up that you feel are important to the group, and also to understand where do we go from here. So I think using those kind of things, when we were talking about preparing the group as much as possible for these conversations, you could even send this beforehand and say, here's what we're going to discuss. What do you think about this? Come prepared to chat about it. And that way people know exactly what they're talking about. It quells some of the anxiety that may come with coming into the difficult conversations, right? So this is a whole LinkedIn learning course. It's only I think 50 minutes. It's by Mary Frances Winters, and she goes through how to have inclusive conversations. And this is just one segment of it, which I think is really important. If you're doing something virtual, it's important to bring in videos, audios, examples from the world or context, because it keeps people interested in going. And so conflict we can expect is inevitable. So the thing is, what do we do when there is a conflict that happens? And this is also going to be in your guide, in your folder, but it's just one of the ways you can deal with conflict that comes up in the group. So you can, pause for a minute. And sometimes, it's, as a facilitator, you can't let the thing go on and on. So you can pause right away when you think. You can just say, wait a second, excuse me, you just want to interrupt. And sometimes you have to say, whoa, 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 right? So sometimes you time out. Let's go back to our community guidelines. And you take them back to say, together, we decided that we would have we would respect each other in this way, et cetera, et cetera. Let's go back to see where we are. You ask them, are we still within our community guidelines? Does the community have any suggestions about where we go from here? As much as you can engage the people, the better. And then, acknowledge and ask a question. The whole thing about curiosity is really important for facilitators. I hear you saying what I'm understanding that you said. It sounds like this is important to you. I think what you're saying is this. So you want to send a message that you're trying to make meaning out of what the person said, and giving them assuming good intent, right? also reminding them of your impact and intent community rule. But you do want to assume good intent, and then just listen to what they said, and then allow them to say it in a different way, and then speak your truth or share your story. So that is allow the other person that was in a conflict, or even you as a facilitator, the more authentic and vulnerable you are, the more you can develop trust within a group. So it is important, like when you're doing these things, to have icebreakers. I'll put icebreakers in the folder, some of them that work really well. Even if you have like an artifact. So for the circle, you have one thing you pass around, you all talk. Or you could say beforehand, hey, bring an artifact that's important to you or your identity or who you are, and allow them to share who they are. And so you know a little bit about each other. I think those kind of things are really important. Allow people to reflect on one thing. Those are really important. But you wanna know that conflict is inevitable. You wanna tell them when it's inappropriate and when it's not. Bringing it back to the community rules. Talk about how you decided as a community to handle disagreements. Recognize that there were polarized views when we came in, and we knew that, and it's okay. And recognize that emotions are high. So this is one way to deal with conflict. And LinkedIn Learning, the next video we'll watch this even shorter, but it's from a person who he talks about conflict. He's a negotiator. He's phenomenal. His courses are 16 minutes. So he has one on how to have conversations about race. He has one on dealing with difficult conversations, how to have conversations about conflict. And they're literally 16 minutes. So I think it's really important as facilitators, as we're preparing for these, to go in and think about how we can watch this while we're doing something else, etc. And he gives different ways and different tools to use conflict. And here is one of his ways of saying there's going to be conflict. There's 3 ways to deal with it. And there's 3 ways you want to avoid when the conflict happens. So I'm just going to show the short video really quick.
Now, when it comes to the common mistakes to avoid, this was tough for me because I only had to choose 3, but there are so many mistakes we can make. But let's focus on the 3 most likely mistakes we can make in these difficult conversations about race. Mistake number 1, it's easy to get defensive, especially if we're confronted with information about ourselves that we find to be unflattering. And instead of getting defensive and immediately defending yourself, take the time to listen. Appreciate what the person is saying, because they're sharing a perspective of you and your behavior that you can't see. And it's an opportunity to improve. So instead of immediately fighting back, take the time to listen. Because think about how that defensiveness registers to the other side. I'm sharing an issue that affects our community, that affects me personally, and you're more concerned about your image, about your reputation. Let's focus on what's most important here. And so make sure you avoid that defensive response. The next thing is vilifying the other side. Listen, I've mentioned it a ton of times before. These conversations are difficult. They are highly, highly emotional. And one of the emotions that we can feel, anger, that's real. That's real. And oftentimes if we're angry, we come in too hot in these conversations, and it creates unnecessary resistance. And so I think about the law of physics and how it applies here in these difficult conversations. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And if we come in too hot, sometimes we invite resistance that we don't need to experience. So make sure you take the time and win that internal negotiation, calm down, and approach it in a way that is strategic and calibrated to meet your goals. And lastly, the mistake that people often make is burning out. If you care about this issue, which I assume you do because you're listening to this course, it often happens that we focus too much on helping others and improving the situation and not enough on our own self-care. You need to listen to your body, listen to your mind, listen to your emotions. How are you feeling? Because if you push too hard, you can reach that breaking point, and then you're not performing at a high level. So it's important to take the time to take care of yourself so you can be that ally and advocate that we need as we march toward progress. So really what we're doing here is we're creating a system of unnatural responses to these difficult conversations. Think about it. Your instinctual response in these conversations, what you really want to say, what your emotions drive you to say, oftentimes it's going to be the wrong answer. And so we need to start to train ourselves in these conversations with the compassionate curiosity framework and other negotiation techniques to make sure that when we are faced with these difficult conversations, we respond appropriately. And as you start to develop this habit, you're going to recognize that your outcomes are going to become significantly better during these difficult conversations about race.
I want to make sure it pauses and doesn't go to the next one. So what are your thoughts there? I like a couple things that he said. And one is that, you know, we talked about really having that, what he calls an internal negotiation. And that will be between whatever topic that you're going into before that topic. So some topics I could easily have be a facilitator. I can facilitate this conversation knowing that I've had this kind of internal conversation and negotiation with myself. And sometimes if something's really, really hot, then I shouldn't do it. That's why it's important. And I'm so happy to see like 50 people here today that are like, we're thinking about really bringing ARO to another level and having these conversations. The more people you have, the better. Because he also talked about burnout, because this is difficult to do, right? So you don't want to constantly be fighting and constantly be working, or having the people in your marginalized communities leading all of these conversations, because it just will be too much. They get burnt out and then they just withdraw. So think about that when if you are in a marginalized population, if you feel like you're always fighting, then think about how you can invite other people in and then practice self-care. It's really important. I love how he talked about getting defensive, because that's our first thing, especially around issues of ism, right? So the first thing is that we don't want to be called a racist. We don't want to be called sexist. We don't want to be called homophobic, xenophobic, whatever the phobics and isms and ist, that's not what we want to do. So we really, really avoid them, or we just get defensive. So as facilitators, we have to think about how not to put people in those situations, even if that means using different language. If I find like a certain word is triggering to my community, I use a different word. Think about how you can do that so you're inviting people in so they don't get defensive and that you don't get defensive as well, right? So how does that resonate with people? Do you find that either you're getting defensive or you haven't recovered from whatever world thing is happening? And unfortunately, the world has given us no shortage of issues that need to be addressed, right? On a daily basis, it's something different. And it's affecting lots of communities, different communities now. So there's, it's just a massive amount of things. So when you're going into leading these conversations, think about those. And if you're in a majority population, then think about how you are very much needed in these conversations. So if you're in a dominant population for whatever the issue is, so those of us who are cisgender, then we're in the dominant population around issues of LGBTQ. How can we step in and be an ally and advocate and lead in these spaces, or at least partner with people in these spaces so that we don't get to that burnout? So I think that's important when you're thinking about your community as well. And then I do want to spend a little bit of time I'm looking at your facilitating your concerns, and I'll show the whole thing in a second, but I'm looking at that. And the one thing that people think about a lot is how to manage and deal with hot moments or hot topics, or if something like that happens. So I'll spend a little time with that and put a handout also in your toolkit for that. So it's like 9 general concepts for hot moments or charges, sometimes they're called. And the one thing you can plan ahead and know that it's happening, right? Be aware of your own hot buttons, gain your composure, be prepared for it. So that's one thing. Acknowledge what happened if it happened. Do not sweep it under the rug. Some participants say that being problematic will let things go unchecked. You don't want to do that, because then people will be afraid to participate or just done and don't want to participate. So acknowledge and frame the moment. Acknowledge that it happened and frame it. You can say something like, a conflict just emerged. And so I'd like to use this as a learning opportunity. We know that this can be uncomfortable, but it's where growth occurs. We're telling them we are going to address this. It may not feel okay, but here's why we're doing it. So I think that's important. And we can discuss, I'll put another sheet that discuss how you have dialogue as opposed to discussion and debate, and the difference between the three. So I think that's important. Okay, yes, I will do that. And then, for the hot topics, really quick, just thinking about how you can postpone a response. You can think about flexibility, what you can do. And then there's like 8 concrete moments. One of them is pause, like what we just did. Writing is a way to diffuse tension. If you need to say, okay, let's just write for a moment to think about how to deal with this. And then it allows people to process in a different way. It allows everyone to calm down. You can break people into smaller group discussions. So, instead of staying in a big group, saying, okay, we're going to think about how we can talk about this in smaller groups. You can share research, which is important. If someone says something that's just not true, you can share a fact. So you want to think about how you can do that and overtly, get rid of all. If somebody says racist jokes or strategies, you can do sarcasm. You can be honest and direct and say, no, we're not dealing with that. So just thinking about these hot topics and how we can do them, I will share that. Also, knowing the importance of apologizing and how to apologize is really important. And we have another handout, Reflect, which I did before. I shared with you before, but we'll hear too. So the other thing is having reflection prompts. And this is another thing that you can do in advance, right? You have these prompts that you're saying, okay, we're talking about courage. How are we doing? And beforehand, you can give this to somebody and say, as a community, we're trying to acknowledge these things. Where are we in there? So let's look at the idea boards, which thank you all for participating. And you can see the idea boards now. Okay, so some of the things that you talked about that we can discuss is how to move from awareness to action. I think I will talk about the things that have been upvoted, and I appreciate you all doing that. I don't even think I remember to share it this time, but you can go to there and then click it. And if you really agree with that, you can upvote it. So we'll talk about some of the things that have been upvoted here. That is how to handle when people don't think the DEI issue is important. So, that is the expectations and the community guidelines that you do that when you share up front. By having these very conversations, you are saying, this is important to us. It's important to us how our community feels. But to keep reiterating that, we think if we say it one time that people will get it, and it's not true. You have to say it over and over in as many different ways as possible. So that's some of the ways that you can handle it when people don't think it's important, and to have a series of conversations instead of one and done. Those usually aren't really helpful because you're just establishing a trust. And the first one, you're just like, playing people out to see, how this is going to work, if they're really serious, if people are committed. So if you have a series of 3, that's an important way to say, this is an important topic to us. We invite you to come back 3 times. Did anybody who upvoted or who resonate with this want to talk about how you can handle it, or just more getting more clarity or response from that issue?
Dr. Willis. Hi,
Yes.
it's Karen. Hi. I think something that the Diversity Minority Committee, that's something we talked about after your wonderful workshop last year, is that we kind of always see the same faces, like when we do our workshop, and we had your wonderful workshop last year. And so we're just trying to make sure, like, we put it out, we try to put on social media, we send out the newsletters, and then even this wonderful group of like people who've come to this facilitator, we have some wonderful new faces, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
But I guess we're just trying to see, like, it always seems kind of like we're preaching to the choir, right? We keep getting the same people who are at these workshops, which is fantastic, right? But we're kind of just wondering, how do we get it out to more and more of the community, more of the senior faculty, more of the students, more of the trainees, right? I think that's why many of us are upvoting that board, is because we do think it's a really important thing for ARO, and yet we're kind of always talking to the same group. It's always us who think it's really important. So I guess maybe that's something you could help us address. Like, how do we get this out? We do think it's an issue from your facilitator training with the idea boards that you did last time. It's obviously something that is an issue in the community, and yet we're not able to spread the word farther, basically.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a concern that we have so often and everywhere. So first, know that it's not just ARO, but I will say that we all have a circle of influence, right? So there are 50 people here, which I think is really impressive. And so you have these 50 people, and ask everyone to invite one person at least, or 3 people, right? 3 people that you will have. And the thing is, the faculty will listen, or really are just very close, or in the circle of influence of people that are faculty. So they're probably more likely to bring the faculty in. So, the faculty that are here, invite one faculty member to join this conversation or series of conversations. Same for each other level. So that's one way you can do it. And then for the people that are committed here, you offer different things and you open it up. So what you've already done was said, okay, we're doing this, but we're opening it up for everybody. And 50 people said that I'm considering facilitating the DEI conversation. So really follow up with that, right? So these 50 people that you have, or the 75 people that registered, here's some of the tools that we have. What's the next step that we can do all together? Our next step is we're going to decide where we're going to, what our issue we're going to talk about, and continue the conversation. And if you can do it soon after, the better. And if you can do it multiple times, the better. So like, everybody won't be able to meet at noon on Tuesday. So, we're having a breakfast time consideration about this. In the evening, we're having a conversation. So I think that's important. I think, this moment, really taking advantage of the moment that we're in, and offering a wide variety of topics, because DEI, we're all passionate about different things. So some people are tired of talking about race, or they don't want to talk about race, but, they might be very, the whole conflict between Israel and Palestine might be, or the immigration issue and, people in cages. That might be what's passionate about them. So put out the topics and say, here are the topics. We want to leverage this moment of 50 to 75 people that are interested in this. Let's move really quick with the next thing about what we can do, and invite everybody to have at least one person come with them. And I think that's big. But yeah, Karen, it's something that we deal with. And I'm really, I applaud ARO for having this conversation, opening it up, and for that 75 people showing up. So I think that's great. But thank you for bringing that up.
Those are all great ideas. Thank you, Dr. Willis.
Mm-hmm. And then the next one that was upvoted is how to tell someone that they made an inappropriate comment without damaging the relationship. I think that's very important to think about relationships, right? And so, and acknowledging that there are relationships and really power dynamics as well. So there are ways that you can walk into the conversation, and there are systems that you use. And one of them, Kwame, in his 16 minutes, he actually gives a framework to say what happened, how it impacted me, and then ask them, like, start with this. I'm here because this relationship is very important to me. And this is what happened. This is how it impacted me. And I'm wondering if you can give me some clarity or where we can go from there. But if you really start with, I'm here because this important, this relationship is important. Where can I go? What can we do? And then decide together how to move forward, right? So I think that's important, but I think it's important that you acknowledge that everyone acknowledges that these relationships are important, especially when you have a community like ARO, that you want to keep these conversations going. Anyone else? I know we only have a little bit of time.
So before everyone has to sign off, I really do just want to take a minute to say thank you, thank everyone for coming. I want to say thank you, Dr. Willis, for, leading us in this great conversation. Of course, we have to all acknowledge that this isn't the end of the conversation, right? So this is sort of the beginning of the conversation. And we've been introduced to a lot of resources that you will have access to, and we'll so make sure that you take advantage of that if you, grab that information from the chat. And before everyone signs off, if anybody has a question, you can certainly open your mic and just unmute yourself and just ask a question directly. But, I also just wanted to acknowledge and tell everyone we really appreciate you coming today. So thank you. Any questions? Any parting words, Dr. Willis?
Yeah, I just want to say, I really do applaud the organization for doing this. I think the conversations, I think you're leveraging the moment that you need the conversations, and it's important to your community to just keep saying that over and over. This is important. This is why we want you here, and really take the next step as soon as possible would be great. And I am here if I can ever help with any conversation. I'm very happy to do that. This is why I do this work, so that other people can be having the conversations. And I really appreciate and am honored to be here and to be a part of it.
Well, thank you again. And so with that, I think we'll end the session. If you have any other questions, though, certainly you can also reach out to ARO and to the Diversity and Minority Affairs Committee. And we will be having another coffee hour soon with a different topic. So look forward to seeing you all there.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.